All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast. My name is Rick Butler, joined across me virtually. Well, you know him well. That is Ryan Schumpert. It is a Sunday evening edition of the Press Pass. Ryan, I don't even know if we've ever recorded a Sunday evening edition of the show before, but big moments call for big shows, and that is exactly what we are doing here today. How are you, my friend? How's this weekend been? Obviously, a big football weekend, not necessarily for Tennessee, but a lot going on, a lot leading into today. Have you enjoyed the college football conference championship slate so far? Well, I say so far, it's over. Did you enjoy it yesterday?
Yeah, no, I did. It was a good, Friday and Saturday. Obviously, still stuff to do, but more relaxing. Tennessee not playing. Enjoyed watching the games and following along with all the action. Then obviously today's been full speed ahead. But for the listeners, I've had a little bit more of a relaxing weekend. Rick has not had a relaxing weekend. Maybe a fun weekend, but not a relaxing weekend. Rick, I think maybe a fresh 2 hours or so off the plane here now. Maybe a little bit longer than that after getting back from Arkansas, being in a wedding this weekend. So I hope that all went well with the wedding in Arkansas. Maybe a little bit better than your last trip to Arkansas in early October, but maybe not the most restful weekend for you.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, both of my fall trips to Arkansas have kind of kicked my butt a little bit. Not only from the time that we had to go drive 22 hours in 3 days, and we went all the way down there, and we might have had a couple adventurous moments along the way on that drive home. But then also today, you go to a wedding, you're a groomsman, you're a best man, you know the responsibilities to do. So even if my voice sounds a little bit more raspy than normal, that is wise, because just about 24 hours ago, we were we were in business getting one of my best friends married. But lot to get into. I got a story for you and Jack that we might get into a little bit later on next week. I will not have that here. What we're going to be doing today is, I would say, Ryan, maybe about 30 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about our initial reactions to this college football playoff reveal. Not only what this means for Tennessee, not only our expectations and sort of our projected path for how Tennessee is going to conquer it. And frankly, going back to last week's Press Pass podcast, we sort of talked about this exact route. We talked about Ohio State. We talked about Oregon. We talked about the puzzle pieces getting Tennessee to where they need to be. Then maybe we'll broaden things out a little bit. Maybe some just broad takes on the playoff as it is, the 12-team format, the first of its kind. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit about the Buckeyes at the end of the show. But what I would say before any of that is you got to be locked into RockyTopInsider.com and on social media over the next 2 weeks. There's going to be nonstop content for Tennessee's first trip to the college football playoffs and program history. We're going to be breaking it down from every single angle we can find. We're also going to be looking at other angles around not just college football, but especially the SEC. We already wrote about Alabama a little bit. Certainly Lane Kiffin, Ryan, I was going to say he's not minced his words, but it's more like his tweets, right? It's not like his thumbs have not taken a break from typing on his keyboard. So there's just so much to get into. This is an incredible time for college football. But what do you say we go ahead and get into this thing? Not a lot different from what our expectations were. Again, I go back to last Wednesday, me, you, and Jack talking about the college football playoffs and what we thought it would be. And ultimately, at least for Tennessee's line, it is what it is. And it is, I would say, and I think a lot of people are agreeing, you wrote about this today, the toughest path in the playoffs by far. We knew that Tennessee was not necessarily going to get an easy route, but this one is a challenge. Tennessee lands as the 9 seed in the playoff bracket. First game is going to be at Ohio State, the 8 seed in the tournament. And then winner of that game has to go all the way out to California to the Rose Bowl to take on number 1 seed Oregon, who is the reigning Big Ten champions. What was your initial reaction to when everything came out today? I know you were leading the coverage for RockyTopInsider.com. I know it was a little bit about what you expected, but what was sort of your initial reaction to Tennessee's spot here in the 12-team playoffs?
Well, it was kind of interesting because you got the reveal a little bit before you got the reveal, because to me the only thing that was really going to change things was if Ohio State jumped Penn State, which we talked about on the podcast on Wednesday, that we felt like that was possible, and the way not that I'd have been shocked by it, but the way that the Big Ten championship game played out, I did not think that would happen. I thought Penn State played well enough that they probably wouldn't get jumped by the Buckeyes. And so Penn State being number 6, they kind of went they kind of hodgepodge, jumped around a little bit. But for once they got to that point, they went 6, 7, 8, 9. They went those seeds in a row. And I guess they went 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. They just already had 12 Clemson up on the board since they were an automatic bid. So you heard 6 Penn State. And at that point, all right, you knew it was going to be Ohio State. You knew that there was no way for Ohio State to jump Notre Dame, given neither of those teams played over the weekend. And I was like, all right, that's kind of what I expected. Like you said, I thought there was a path. I mean, I think Tennessee had a case to jump Penn State. I never thought that was going to happen at all. But I thought that, they had a case for that. So I guess it was, the reaction was to start getting everything out more than anything. But that was the expectation for me. I was not too shocked by that. So it was, and I guess just kind of, it's not just to that point, but to the point of the whole seating today. It's been talked about a bunch since before the season. I know we've talked about it on the podcast some. Would they punish these teams that lose conference championship games? And the answer was a resounding no. Nobody got punished, even SMU, who stayed in the field, losing a close game in the ACC championship. But Texas didn't get punished. Penn State didn't get punished. And I think that was, when I looked at that, it maybe wasn't what I was thinking in the moment when everything was revealed. But with Tennessee playing Ohio State, I think that's kind of the big takeaway from it.
Yeah, and I think you can look back at the season now in hindsight and certainly see what this committee has given for the 12-team official playoff bracket. And they weren't going to be the ones to immediately sort of devalue that conference championship weekend, especially in this first go-around for the 12-team playoff. So I definitely think you're right. Penn State, competitive game with Oregon, at least that's from what I saw, some of the highlights. It was going on around the same time as my own festivities, but it looked to be a 1-2 score game for most of the game. I really felt like it was going to need to be a bit more of a blowout, especially at the end of the day on the scoreboard. 21 points, 28 points, something along those lines. And it just didn't look like that's what it was. You can obviously correct me if I'm wrong. And then, of course, Texas, being at number 5, obviously, SEC championship loser. Maybe some of the fans on both Texas and Georgia thought that they could be in a worse position if they lost. Obviously, the committee said, no, hey, we have a lot of respect for those two teams in the championship game. They went head-to-head. They went toe-to-toe. They went to overtime. And Texas ends up with the best spot, technically, right? That's not the automatic qualifier. So I agree. I think that certainly this was, being the first year of the playoffs, the committee was saying, look, we believe in conference championship weekend. And whether it wasn't said out loud, they're not going to devalue it here in this first year. Now, maybe some things are going to change as we go forward, but I think you could tell they did not want to take all of the air out of the balloon that is conference championship weekend.
For sure. And I guess 2 thoughts on that. One, you talked about that number 5 seed that we've valued so much. I think, looking at it now in a little bit of hindsight, and there are some special circumstances here, I think it's the 6 seed that's really better than the 5 seed. 6 seed Penn State, who gets SMU in the first game and then Boise State in the second game. And to me, the really big thing here, and this is the part that's a little bit, this is very unique to this year. Well, in my opinion, and we'll get into more of this in a second, the 4 best teams in the country in some order, and this is subjective, but I think most people would probably agree, are Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia. 3 of them are on one side of the bracket with the same bracket the 5 seeds on. The other one being Georgia, the 2. You don't even know their starting quarterback's going to be available. So Penn State, who's the 6th seed, it's hard not to think they're in a better spot than Oregon, who just beat them yesterday. Gets the 6th seed. They'll get SMU in the first game, Boise State in the second game, SMU at home, I should say. Boise State in the second game. And then they'll have to face presumably a really good Georgia team in the semifinals. But who knows if it's with Carson Beck and that injury, I don't think really anything's come out of it here on Sunday, but it didn't really look great. And obviously he missed a game. It didn't seem like some simple, and it wasn't like a concussion or something where it's like, all right, he'll be fine to play in a month. It feels like if it's if it's the downside of that injury, if things went wrong, it's not something where he's going to be back in the playoffs. It seems like he's going to be something that, he'll be just hoping to be throwing in the combine or something, which I'm not even sure that would be the case. So it's funny after all of that was a talking point. And the other thing you said about, devaluing the conference championships, because that's how I'd phrased it too. So like I'm completely in the same boat as you, or I
We're in
don't mean this
cahoots here.
to be a shot or anything. But now that I think about it in hindsight, it's kind of the opposite. You kind of devalue the conference championship by not punishing anybody because there's a little bit different. It would have been a little bit better to host still, but like Texas and Penn State, we're just talking about, they're in that 5 and 6 spot that are great. It really didn't hurt them. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that like diminish the games. The games, Texas seemed real heartbroken when they didn't win yesterday. Um,
Sure.
but it didn't really seem like there was a lot of real repercussions. Now, I think the more accurate thing, which people have said, is you don't want teams not wanting to be in the conference championship. Um, but I'm not sure that necessarily will devalue it because I think once you're there, you still are going to you obviously try to win. So I don't know. All that's really interesting to
No,
me.
that's a
And I've kind of
fascinating
changed
thought.
my perspective on it maybe a little bit, and I'll be curious to think about it more when I have more time just to set to that specifically.
No, I like what you're saying there, and that's not really a thought that I'd gone to because it's like, yes, there I don't and that's just where I think that we're gonna figure out more as time goes on, right? How much does this conference championship truly matter? Is this a situation where people can be punished by losing? Or is it a situation where it's saying, hey, if you just make your conference championship weekend and you're a pretty good team, I'm not looking at Iowa State here in this conversation. I'm talking about Penn State, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, and who else am I missing here?
Penn State, SMU.
SMU. But is the committee also saying, hey, if you can reach that game, then you're probably going to have a great chance. It's interesting to see what they're going forward, and I'm not sure about precedent. Right? Is this going to be some sort of precedent that they set this year? Is it going to be broken next year? We don't know. But I want to go back to what you said a second ago. Yeah, man, is the 5 or excuse me, is the 6 seed not in a better position than the 5 seed right now? And is the 2 seed not in a better position than the 1 seed right now? To me, I think that they got the right teams in for this format. I think that they got the right teams in. I don't think that Alabama should have been one of those 12 teams. I don't think that Ole Miss, South Carolina, Miami, I don't think it is. I think that the 12 teams, you give Clemson credit for jumping in. I don't like the fact that SMU has sort of been in this, is it SMU, is it Alabama, is it I think that SMU has been a playoff team, and I think that they deserve to be in the playoffs. It's just that they're in that little Alabama conversation to me because Clemson is jumping into the fold here with that win over the Ponies yesterday. But it is just kind of this fascinating position to see, and certainly we're not the first ones to talk about it, and we won't be the last. But it's the formatting, it's the seeding. There's just so much conversation to be had around it all.
Yeah, 100%. And you hit the nail on the head there that we're not the first ones to talk about it. We won't be the last. But yeah, I don't think Tennessee got screwed by the committee or anything like that. Like I said, I think
Yeah,
there was a
to
case
bring
to
it
be
back to
made.
them.
Yeah, I don't think I think there was a case to be made that Tennessee should have been ahead of Penn State, but like I don't think it was crazy to rank Penn State above Tennessee. The issue is that you have the number 9 team, and the number 9 team in the country is the 3 seed, and the number 12 team in the country is the 4 seed. Like that's the issue, and I'm sure they'll get that fixed. And it's not that it's some rocket science to figure out, but if the teams were just ranked, the 12 teams that were in the field, not 1 to 12 in the country, like you're still giving the automatic bid to Clemson, but if the 12 teams were just in the field, were ranked 1 to 12, Tennessee would be the 7. They'd be playing SMU at home, and they would get Georgia if they won that game. And like that's what it should have been. Like that feels like fair. That for what Tennessee did, you're gonna get a SMU team at home that's solid, but you're going to be favored by, which you should be when you're ranked number 7 in the country the first game, and then you're going to have to face a really good team in the second game, which I think is going to be the reality for really anybody that's not in that first 4. If you were doing it in this system, which it's not currently the case. So currently the case, there's going to be a lot of teams that are not going to have a great a hard second game. Like, and again, I said this on the show last week, and it's a lot easier pill to swallow for Tennessee fans now that SMU got that spot than Alabama. But if Alabama got in that spot, you would trade the 9 seed for being the 11 seed and playing Penn State in the first game, and then I guess the 3 seeds Boise State, then Boise State in the second game 10 times out of 10. So there's no doubt that it's a flawed system. I think it'll get changed. pretty soon. I bet it'll go to 16 teams too, if we're being frank. They'll keep on inviting more money into the equation as long
I
as
was
they
going
can,
to
I'm
say,
sure. Yeah.
I'd imagine that these last 3 weeks have brought in a lot of ratings, a lot of clicks, a lot of eyeballs, and a lot of conversation. Something that we said a couple of weeks ago was it's sort of in that theme of what is it? No publicity is bad publicity, something like
Yeah.
that. To where, yes, there were debates and there were arguments and so much going on, but people were talking about it. People were stirring up that conversation. And ultimately, that is what something like this is meant to create. I think that if you look at, obviously, what is the other big tournament style thing in college sports? It's March Madness. I think when you look at March Madness, yes, you can see some things where you'd say, yes, I'd maybe rather have that path, or I'd maybe rather have that path. But it's so much more magnified when you just have these 12 teams here. So many conversations to be had about this. But let's kind of take it back to where we started. Tennessee going on the road to Ohio State. Now, one of the immediate reactions that people had coming out of this reveal earlier today on Sunday was that it wasn't going to be a big noon kickoff, if you will.
Yeah.
It's going to be a freezing cold game. The sun is going to be long set by kickoff. It is going to be a cold weather game in Columbus, Ohio. Tennessee will have, I believe, Ryan, you wrote about it today. I believe it's 8 p.m. Eastern time. Is that correct?
Yep. Correct.
So that, we talked about last week that if Tennessee had to go through a stretch of at Ohio State and then all the way out to the Rose Bowl to play Oregon, it was going to be hard for us to see any other tougher path. Not only is that what Tennessee gets, but boy, are they in a primetime game underneath the lights in the cold weather, no sun to be found. I don't know if there's a lot of sun in Ohio anyways. It's not really a place I frequent to very often, but there certainly won't be on Saturday, December 21st, when Tennessee takes on Ohio State. Just made it a little bit tougher. I know that's not the thing that we're going to hammer home or we're going to stick to for a while, but you talk about this tough road that Tennessee's got to go in, and now it gets a little bit darker and a little bit later for that game as well.
Yeah, two things on that note. I'll start with the cold weather. Josh Heupel, as you'd expect, downplayed it a little bit today, and I do think, and look, things can change in 2
Josh
weeks.
Heupel
Right
would
now,
be wearing shorts for that game if he could.
Yeah,
shorts and a t-shirt.
Which actually, I'll go there. Funny story to that point, Rick, that people might not know about. And you know about it because I think you were there. But two years ago, maybe I can't remember when, but one of Heupel's years when they were doing construction on the stadium, so they didn't have the orange and white game. They let the media watch a scrimmage at the Haslam practice field, and this is like in, I don't know, surely it was March. It wouldn't have been April. But it was so cold and it was spitting snow, which I'm out there trying to take notes on a notepad of things that's going on, and I'm as southern as it gets when it comes to the weather. I cannot do the cold, and it's just miserable.
Yeah.
And Josh Heupel's out there in shorts and his kind of light windbreaker, and he was making fun of the media when we just talked to him outside, kind of a scrum session after the scrimmage was over, and he was making fun of us. So I'm sure it won't bother him.
Well, he roasted Brent Hubbs just at the press conference last week. All the media came into the Tennessee building whenever that press conference was last week. We were in our cold weather gear, had the beanies on. I think somebody came in with a scarf in. Before the first question's even asked, there's a little bit of a pause as they get the microphone. He looks down, he sees Brent Hubbs, and he's just, Hubbs, what are you doing? And he singled him out. He could have picked any of us out in the crowd, but he even got somebody with that last week.
That's funny. Yeah, but for right now, and obviously things can change, it doesn't look horribly cold in Columbus. I mean, it's going to be cold, obviously, but I think that night right now it's like low in the 20s. So look, Tennessee played that Vanderbilt game was like right around 30 degrees during that game. They practice in the morning, which certainly has been very cold the last week in Knoxville. I'm not sure what the weather will look like the next 2 weeks. I don't think anybody in Knoxville wants the cold weather, but it's probably going to help Tennessee out. That they can get more and more prep with those morning practices being cold. I know it's been in the 20s and teens when Tennessee's been practicing this week. So, I don't think that's going to be a huge deal. Maybe I'll be wrong. And then the last thing to the night game note, just now at this point, this will be Tennessee's sixth game away from home this year. It will be the fifth game in the ABC primetime night slot. So Tennessee, every single game besides that Vanderbilt game, they have been an ABC at night in the primetime slot. So Tennessee, no stranger to that either.
No, they're bringing it. They are bringing it full circle. Not only do you kind of start the season around then, I believe that North Carolina State game, week 2 or week 3, whatever it was a
Yep.
long time ago at this point. And now you're back at it, having to go on the road. Now, I will say, and I want to get to you in a second because have you published this post yet? The quick look at Ohio State?
Yep.
Okay, so as you're hearing this podcast right now, you can head over to RockyTopInsider.com, get Ryan's quick look at Ohio State before we continue to break them down throughout the week and next week too. Oh boy, I'm losing I almost lost my train of thought there by plugging the article. There's a couple things that we'll get into right now. But I think that one of the initial things that I think about when I think about Ohio State, and yes, they are a very talented team. I think that some Tennessee fans may be overlooking the road element a little bit, but I don't blame them, right? Because you're in the playoffs, right? You're trying to find any way for your team to go out there and win. You're trying to pick apart the advantages, but Tennessee has still struggled on the road a little bit. Now, I do think that win over Vanderbilt to close the season is a nice little confidence boost to say, hey, we can go out on the road. We can go out into, cold conditions and we can play solid football. It took Tennessee a little bit to get warmed up in that game. But one thing I think about, and this isn't X's and O's related, I know you've got that better covered. One thing that I've been thinking about with Ohio State is, yes, they put together a fantastic season. And maybe it's a vocal minority. I absolutely think that could be the case. But you go back a couple of weeks ago, Tennessee goes up 10-0 on Georgia. And Georgia is a confident team. They've been in these positions before. They've been in the playoffs before. They knew how to fight and scratch and claw their way back into that game. Is there a possibility that Ohio State, after losing, 3 games in a row to Michigan, maybe even 4? Is there a chance that yes, they want to see their team advance, but maybe there's a little less wiggle room with the fan base there? I don't think that's going to come into play too much, but it was at least just one of the small little storylines that was rattling around my brain as I was sitting there in the Charlotte airport trying to take off back here to Knoxville. I don't think that's going to be one of the things that we end up talking about, over the next 2 weeks or so, but it was one of the quick thoughts that came into my mind.
No, I think it's 100% fair, and I don't know if you were able to watch the selection show when it was going on. Kirk Street said the same thing, that he thought the fans would be restless.
Stealing Kirk. I wasn't doing.
I knew you weren't stealing Kirk.
He's right.
It'd be a fair,
right.
Fair point either way. And he said it more dramatic than that. He said he almost phrased it in the sense of like he thought it was almost a bad thing that Ohio State had to play at home if Tennessee could jump on them early, which I don't buy it to that extent, but. Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's going to be a restless crowd. And I think that is one of the, I think it would have been better for Tennessee to play Penn State, but I do think that's one of the advantages of playing Ohio State. I think the Penn State environment and crowd would be a lot harder. It would be a lot more full throttle, 60 minutes compared to Ohio State, which I think is going to be a little disgruntled. So
yeah, the whiteout.
I think that's, I think that's fair. And I think that puts a lot of emphasis on Tennessee starting this game fast and seeing if they can take the crowd out of it a little bit.
Okay, so we know what Tennessee has been able to do to get to this point. It's been defensive. It's been a very good defensive team throughout the year. They've been able to wreck shop in a lot of different ways on the defensive side of the ball. Tell me a little bit about Ohio State as we start to break them down over the next 2 weeks, heading into the holiday and the Christmas season. Again, that game taking place on December 21st in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head a minute ago when you said really, really talented team. It's just, yes. I think maybe the most talented team in the country, one of them for sure. Not a whole lot of flaws, not a whole lot of weaknesses. I'll start just with the strengths. Defensively, they've been really, really good, as you would expect. First in the Big Ten in points allowed per game, first in yards per allowed a game, first in pass defense. I think they have. Their red zone defense, I think, has been the best in the entire country this year. They've been good on both sides of red zone defense and offense. But, yeah, they've allowed 10 touchdowns on 29 trips to the red zone, only 16 scores. So they've been really good when the field shrinks. Offensively, and I got a couple more keys into the weeds we can get to in a minute, or a couple things that really stand out. But offensively, it's really talented. They got 3 really good receivers. Jeremiah Smith, who's, up there with Ryan Williams at Alabama, one of those two just phenom freshman receivers this year. Carnell Tate, a name Tennessee fans will know well, who Tennessee finished runner-up for a few years ago.
Yep.
He's one of their top receivers, and they got Egbuka. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. A really good guy too. The offense has just been solid. The offense has not truly been great, and they got stars at running back too. They got Travion Henderson. They have Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, who was really good. Now, I do think the two things that I would highlight is why this offense hasn't been great. One, they've been banged up on the offensive line. Their starting left tackle got hurt against Oregon. He's out for the year. Their starting center got hurt. I think it was really in practice the week going into the Indiana game. He's out for the year. So the offensive line hasn't been fantastic. And then the quarterback play is just fine. It's nothing to write home about. Will Howard, the Kansas State quarterback, they went out, they let Kyle McCord go to Syracuse after last year. They went out and got Howard in the transfer portal from Kansas State, and he's been basically the same as Kyle McCord was last year. Numbers are very similar. He's a little bit better runner. He's got 7 rushing touchdowns, so he's a threat to run the ball in the red zone, though he doesn't just run for a ton of yards. He's not like a super fast guy. Those two aspects, they haven't been great. And I would say to that point, the 4 Ohio State games to me of significance this year is they lost the game they lost at Oregon, the game they lost to Michigan, the wins they have over Penn State and Indiana. Those are the 4 games I'll be looking at a lot, and I'll do more to dive into them, and I've done a little bit of it now. Those 4 games against Michigan, against Penn State, against Indiana, Ohio State did not throw for more than 201 yards in any of those games. Did not throw for a lot of yards in those games. Now, against Oregon, they threw for about 330, which, look, I think and we're looking ahead now, Oregon secondary seems susceptible. From looking at that stat and from watching them play Penn State yesterday, that pass defense seems a little shaky. But all that to say, their passing offense in their bigger games this year, despite having an awesome receiving core, has not been, not been wowing by any means.
That's fascinating to look at, and I didn't really expect that. To hear that, what they were able to do that against Oregon, it makes sense for the rest of them. I think one of the other things that you look at when you talk about, Ohio State, one of the things that I was reading about today, just sort of trying to get a little bit of my own information about Ohio State down, is that they've been very effective on first down. And that is going to be a place where Tennessee can potentially create a little bit of chaos there, a little bit of, put Ohio State in a position they're not necessarily used to, but they're also tough in that position. They're also solid in that position. So I think in this game, whether it is the first down battle, whether it is the red zone battle for both teams, you just talked about Ohio State being a really good red zone defense. You watch this Tennessee team for 12 games, they've been a really good red zone defense as well. I think there's going to be a lot of little battles throughout this game that are ultimately going to decide it. And yes, that's what a college football game is. That's what college sports games are. But I do think that we, over the next 2 weeks, will be able to kind of go through and pinpoint where we believe that some of those battles will be. You just mentioned it. One is sort of how is Tennessee's offense going to attack that secondary? How is Ohio State's offense going to attack Tennessee's secondary? We talked about red zone. So I think over these next 2 weeks, we're going to get a pretty good idea of what those little battles are around the field that will ultimately decide this game. Yes, Tennessee going on the road, I think does give, some Tennessee fans the shakes a little bit. I think that's fair and justified. But where can Tennessee sort of climb back into those things? I think obviously you start with Dylan Sampson, what he's going to be able to do for Tennessee, trying not to keep the Vols offense behind the sticks. But again, just to repeat the point I've made 10 times now as I'm starting to ramble a little bit, we're going to find out where those little battles are over the next 2 weeks, see how they play out on Saturday, December 21st.
For sure. And Ohio State's red zone offense has been good too. Not quite as good as their red zone defense, but I think it's something like 38 touchdowns and 48 trips to the red zone. So, or maybe I'm off by 10 on both. No, it's 38 touchdowns and 49 trips to the red zone. So,
okay.
They've been really good there. Two more things I have specifically that just stood out in my first scout of Ohio State this afternoon. Ohio State's run defense, like I said, they're first in the Big Ten in pass defense, yards per game allowed, points per game allowed, just fourth, which is still good in run defense. But the common theme in those 2 losses against Michigan, against Oregon, gave up over 150 rushing yards in both those games. So that to me, that's a big number. to circle for Tennessee in this game. Could Tennessee run for 150 yards? Because when that's been, and even in the Penn State game that was close, in the Indiana game that was not that close, but neither of those teams ran for a lot of yards on Ohio State. So that's a big one I'll look at. And then the other one, Ohio State, I think it's like something like 30th in the country in penalty yards per game. It's just like right around 40. They've been good. They've been not committed a lot of penalties, and obviously that's been an issue for Tennessee all year. Tennessee, I think something like they're in the 100s in that stat, I want to say. So that'll be another thing worth watching.
Yeah, and we're going to be figuring out all of those things over the next 2-week stretch. But of course, not just this initial information that you've been hearing here tonight. You can also head over to RockyTopInsider.com to find a ton of great angles here in this opening day of the college football playoff reveal as we continue to get things done. Specifically, Ryan's quick look at Ohio State, as I'm sure a lot of Tennessee fans are going to be doing their research here over the next 2 weeks to find this out. But look, Ohio State lost to Michigan in their last game. What is that going to mean for that team? That's a senior bunch who I don't believe has ever beaten Michigan. I think I even saw something a little while ago that said, this senior class right now, the only person of that class to ever beat Michigan was Texas quarterback Quinn Ewers. So what is that going to be? Is this going to be an Ohio State team that is a little bit down and dejected that, no matter how great of seasons they have, if they can't beat their true rival, if they're getting into fistfights on the field after the game in their own territory, is that going to be a little bit of a mental roadblock? Or do they say, hey, we're just looking for violence after this? They obviously showed that a little bit on the 50-yard line last weekend, but are we just looking for a little bit of violence and we want to get some frustration out? So I don't know what that's going to look like, but certainly another storyline that goes into this game.
It's a good point. No, something I was gonna, touch on too. So I'm glad you brought it up. But last time, and this is obviously very specific, but last time Ohio State lost to Michigan at home 2 years ago. The next game they came out and played great against Georgia, and what I think was the Sugar Bowl. Lost that game on a game-winning kick, controlled that game for most of the game. I still think probably would have won that game if Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't get a concussed there early in the fourth quarter because Georgia really had no answers for him. So they responded well the last time. Obviously that's one sample size, and they've lost to Michigan a couple other times in recent years too on the road. But I thought that was something that's notable, and that was a Georgia team that Georgia's had a lot of really good teams, and obviously two teams that have won the national championship in recent years. I think that 22 team it was the best of the bunch, and I was sitting here without thinking through it a bunch. I would say that 22 Georgia team is probably the best team in college football since the 2019 LSU team.
Yeah. Funny enough, you mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. He's been a name I've been watching a lot today because I need him to do a little bit better than he's doing right now.
He's not doing much, is he?
No, he's got 3 at the time of this recording. It's 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. He's got 3 receptions for 34 yards. But you know who's had himself a day on the fantasy football sticks? You know who's had himself a day? Jawan Jennings with 7 receptions, 90 yards, and a pair of touchdowns. If you want any little, playoff reveal day mojo, if you want a little something that you can maybe take into consideration, you can say that Tennessee's receiver is beating out Ohio State's receiver, at least on the Nature Boys fantasy football team. So I have been specifically looking at that. I had to start both of them today.
I'm starting both of them today too. That's funny.
No kidding. I didn't even know that. Jawan Jennings
probably both suck. Mine does.
Well, I'm in first place, but my team has really suffered some big blows here, especially in I'd say the last 5 weeks or so. So I really built myself up a good lead at the beginning of the year, and I've been just hanging on to it for dear life here towards the end of it. But that is funny. I didn't know that we both had those. Jawan Jennings has been it's good to see him really elevating himself in that Niners offense. Obviously a guy who's been not buried behind, that's certainly not the right word, but he's had a lot of really good other playmakers around him. Some of the injuries that they've been having, it's good to see him step up. But if you want a little bit of playoff reveal day mojo, you can at least look at Ryan and I's RTI fantasy teams, right? And Jawan Jennings blowing Marvin Harrison Jr. out of the water. So there you go. Maybe you can hang on to that.
There you go. Yep.
All right, my friend. Well, unless you got any other thoughts, I think we go ahead and get out of here. This has been a pretty good sort of opening conversation to what is going to be a very action-packed 2 weeks for us here at Rocky Top Insider. again, I would say subscribe to the Rocky Top Press Pass wherever you are listening to this. Or if you're watching it on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you're locked in. Make sure you're liking. We love to hear from you, especially in this big chaotic month of the season that we call December. Make sure you're also checking out RockyTopInsider.com each and every day. Make sure you follow Ryan Schumpert on Twitter. He's one of the best Tennessee athletics reporters that you can possibly find on the internet at rshump00. And if you want to, you can follow myself as well at Rick_Butler. Our partner in crime, Jack Foster, was not with us today. I would imagine that he will be back with us next week, as I am definitely eager to hear all of his opinions. He's a true college football broadband junkie. So I'm really excited to hear some of his thoughts on this 12-team playoff reveal. But, man, there's a lot of conversation coming up here in the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to try to save my voice a little bit here tonight and tomorrow. I'm sure we'll jump back on the show sometime next midweek, or sometime midweek next for us. But, man, great sort of open to the playoffs. This is a new road for us. This is a new road for Tennessee, certainly a new road for Tennessee fans. And I am definitely eager to travel down this road and see where it ends up. Whether that be Atlanta, whether it be Columbus or California or anywhere else in between, certainly excited to walk this road and see what Tennessee can do in the first ever 12-team college football playoffs.
Yep, should be really interesting. Obviously, a challenging path for Tennessee, a fun path if they can win, beat Ohio State, play in the Rose Bowl for the first time in a long time. So should be a lot of fun and plenty for us to get into over the next 2 weeks. And probably by the time you're listening to this, maybe by the time you're listening to this, I'd be curious to see the breakdown in numbers. But chance by the time you're listening to this, Tennessee basketball is the new #1 team in the country. So, and a busy week for them. 2 Power 5 games up in Madison Square Garden against Miami on Tuesday night. Then they'll be in Champaign to face a good Illinois team on Saturday. So, obviously a ton of football going on, but a Tennessee basketball program. Lady Vols off to a nice start too. Plenty going on.
Big
in
win.
Tennessee sports
Big win.
world. Yep, big week for Kim Caldwell's squad with 2 Power 5 wins.
No doubt about it. Again, that is Ryan Schumpert. I am Rick Butler. You've been listening to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass podcast today. We thank you for listening. We hope you stay tuned and stay on board for the college football playoffs run that Tennessee will have no matter how long it lasts. We will do our best to get you the best Tennessee news, notes, and coverage every single day. Otherwise, enjoy the show, subscribe to the show, and we'll see you back down the road for more college football playoff talk. Tennessee versus Ohio State in the first round in Columbus. We will have you covered. Thank you very much. Have a good day.